I woke up to the sound of a voice that made my heart stop before I even fully opened my eyes. It was quiet but clear, calling my name with a warmth I hadn't heard in years, and when I turned, I couldn't believe who was standing in the doorway, leaning slightly against the frame like he belonged there even though it had been over 5 years since I had last seen him. His eyes soft but serious. His smile the same one that had haunted my dreams more nights than I could count. And for a moment I was frozen, unsure if I was dreaming or awake, unsure if the years of silence between us could be erased in an instant. He stepped closer, each movement deliberate, and I noticed the little things that had always been him, the way he held himself, the familiar tilt of his head when he was unsure, the soft sigh he let out when he tried to speak but words failed him. And then he finally said it, just one sentence, simple but powerful. I thought I would never hear it again. I thought it was lost to time, and yet it was here, floating between us, heavy with meaning and memory. I never expected him to show up on this quiet Monday morning. The house still smelling faintly of coffee from the mug I had left on the counter. The sunlight spilling through the curtains in long golden streams that made his hair glow like it had when we used to run in the park together. And I could feel my chest tighten with a mix of shock, joy, and a sadness I hadn't realized I was still carrying, my hands clenched. The sheets, my nails pressing into the fabric as if holding on could anchor me to reality. And he took a step closer, reaching out but not touching, just holding his hand in the air, hesitant, unsure. And my mind raced with everything I wanted to say, everything I had never said, the letters I never sent, the phone calls I never made, the apologies and confessions I had kept locked away, and all of it rushed back in a heartbeat, overwhelming and tender all at once. I wanted to speak, but my throat felt tight, dry, and my mind searched for the right words, words that could explain 5 years of longing in a single breath. And finally I managed, barely a whisper, "Are you really here?" And he smiled, a small sad smile, and said yes, and that single word made the world stop, made the air thick with possibility and fear. And I realized I had imagined this moment countless times, but never like this, never with him looking so real, so present, and the memories hit me like waves. Laughing in the rain, holding hands under the old oak tree, stolen glances during classes, whispered secrets at night when the world was asleep, the fights that ended with tears and promises, the arguments that had driven us apart, the distance that had stretched like a canyon between us, and here he was, standing in my living room, turning the past into something tangible, something I could almost reach out and touch. I wanted to ask why now, why after all this time, but the words caught in my throat again as he took a small step closer, his eyes locking with mine, searching, and I felt a flicker of the old ache, the old longing that had never really left. It was like stepping into a dream I had been afraid to remember. And I couldn't look away, I didn't want to, even though my heart raced with fear and hope all at once. He finally broke the silence, saying he had something to tell me, something important, and my stomach twisted with nerves. I had waited for years to hear him. But not like this, not in the middle of a morning that was supposed to be ordinary. And I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice, asking him what it was, but before he could answer, the sound of the mail slot clanging downstairs pulled both of our attention. And I remembered the unopened letters on the counter, the ones I had been putting off, the ones I had almost forgotten, and my curiosity mixed with dread, the way our timing had always been off, the way life had always interfered, and now it seemed it was happening again. I stepped toward the stack, my fingers brushing the envelopes, but he moved first, reaching over me, his hand stopping just short of touching, and whispered, "Wait, don't open that one yet, it's not what you think," and my heart lurched. Because I hadn't even seen the top envelope, hadn't realized it was the one that carried the secret I had buried for years, the one that could change everything between us, the one that could either heal or shatter us. And he stepped back, giving me space, his eyes full of urgency, his expression unreadable, and I realized he had come not just to see me, not just to say hello, but because something had finally brought him back into my life, something he needed me to know, something that couldn't wait any longer. And the tension in the room was thick, tangible, like the air before a storm, every heartbeat echoing in my ears, every breath feeling like it carried the weight of years. And I wanted to ask, to demand, to understand, but I could barely speak, because the letter, the one I hadn't opened, seemed to pulse in my hand as if alive, as if it knew the moment had arrived. And his eyes never left mine, silently pleading for me to trust him, to hold back for just a moment, to let him speak first. And I felt a strange mix of fear and excitement, the way you feel when you're about to fall, the way the world narrows down to just 2 people and one secret. And I knew this morning would change everything, That this was the moment where the past collided with the present, where love and regret and longing all met, and I had to make a choice. But before I could, he finally said it, the words that made my knees weak, the words that I would never forget, words that made my chest ache and my heart leap. He said, "I need to tell you about someone from your past, someone you thought you had lost forever." And I froze, my hand still on the letter, my eyes wide, and my mind screamed, who, how, why? And the room felt smaller, the light brighter, and for a split second I felt like the entire world had narrowed down to that single, unbelievable sentence, and I realized I had no idea what was coming next, no idea if I was ready for it. And as I looked into his eyes, I saw the urgency, the fear, and the hope all at once, and I knew I was about to face something I had never expected, something that would change everything I thought I knew about love and timing. And I held my breath, clutching the letter, waiting, because I had to know. And the story of use of him, of the secret I had buried, was about to begin again, and the twist, the shock, the revelation, everything was just one sentence away, leaving me on the edge of knowing and not knowing. And that was the moment when the past and present collided, when the ordinary morning became the beginning of a journey I would never forget, and I could feel it deep in my bones that whatever came next, it would change my life forever. That I couldn't take my eyes off him, my heart still racing from the shock of his presence. And suddenly my mind drifted back to the first time we met, a memory so vivid it felt like it was happening again right in front of me. I remembered the small bookstore downtown where I had been searching for a novel I had been dying to read. And he was there too, fumbling with a stack of books taller than him, his glasses sliding down his nose, and I had laughed at his concentration, not realizing that the sound of my voice would somehow stick with him forever. He had looked up, startled, and our eyes had met, and in that instant there was a spark, a quiet recognition, not of faces or names but of souls. I remember how I asked him what he was looking for, and he said a book he had loved as a child, something about adventures in faraway places. And we started talking, words tumbling out of us in an easy rhythm, the kind that makes you forget the world around you. We laughed over shared stories of clumsy childhood mistakes and awkward first crushes. We traded recommendations for novels and music, and it was effortless, as if we had known each other forever. I remember the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how he tilted his head when he was thinking, and how I wanted to memorize every little detail. And over the next few weeks, we ran into each other at the coffee shop, the park, even the small art exhibit downtown, each encounter weaving us closer together, until it became natural to text and call, to share little secrets about our day. And one evening, walking home under the streetlights, he had taken my hand, not in a rushed way but gently, like he was afraid to let go, and I had felt something shift, a quiet certainty that this connection was more than friendship. It was something rare, something worth holding on to. We spent hours talking, dreaming, planning trips we would take one day, sharing fears we never admitted to anyone else, and in those moments it felt like we had built our own little world where nothing could reach us. But as perfect as it seemed, there had been cracks, small misunderstandings that had grown into walls we didn't know how to tear down. I remember the day he left for a new city, a job opportunity he couldn't refuse, and how we promised to stay in touch, how we swore that distance wouldn't matter. But life had a way of complicating things. The calls became less frequent, the texts shorter, until the silence was louder than any words could have been. I blamed him for leaving. He blamed me for not understanding, and pride and fear and misunderstanding built a wall that neither of us had the courage to climb. I remember the last conversation, strained and awkward, trying to laugh through the tension, neither of us admitting how much we missed each other. And then the final goodbye, not angry, not bitter, just empty. And the months that followed were heavy with regret, each remembering the other differently, both holding on to memories and what-ifs. And now, standing here in my living room, seeing him after all these years, it was like the past had reached through time and touched me again. I could see it in his eyes. The same longing, the same regret, and yet there was hope. And as we began to talk, snippets of our shared past spilling into the present, I remembered the small letter he had once written me before leaving, one I had never read, hidden away in a drawer. I pulled it out, my hands trembling slightly, and he leaned over, curiosity and anticipation in his gaze, telling me to read it. And as I unfolded the paper, the words flowed back to me. His handwriting unmistakable, simple but heartfelt. I had never known the full story, never realized that the misunderstanding that had driven us apart had been nothing more than crossed words and missed messages, that he had been trying to reach me, trying to explain, and the realization hit me like a wave, that all these years I had blamed him for leaving, for the silence, when in truth, he had been trying just as hard to hold on, just as I had. And the twist of understanding made my chest tighten. A mix of relief and sorrow, that what had seemed like abandonment was really a series of miscommunications and timing, cruel timing that had kept us apart. And in that moment, I saw him differently, not just the boy I had loved, not just the man who had appeared in my doorway this morning, but as someone who had never stopped caring, who had carried our past like a treasure, imperfect but precious. And I realized that what had separated us was not lack of love but the way life had moved. And as I looked up from the letter, his eyes met mine. Again, softer now, filled with unspoken words, a silent apology, and hope that we could finally rewrite the story that had been left unfinished. And as the room seemed to shrink around us, all the years of longing and heartbreak folded into this one instant, I understood that this moment was the bridge between our past and whatever lay ahead. And then I noticed something I had never seen before in the letter, a small note tucked into the fold, a date and a place, something he had planned but never mentioned, something that now made me realize there was more to the story, something that could change everything I thought I knew about our separation. And as I held it in my hands, my pulse quickened, because it wasn't just a memory or a confession, it was an invitation, a clue that the past had more secrets to reveal, and that what I had believed about why we were apart might not have been true at all. And the excitement, the fear, and the anticipation all collided in a single heartbeat, leaving me breathless, staring at him, waiting for the next revelation, and knowing that the story of us was far from over, that the twist in our fate was only beginning, and that the bridge between memory and reality was about to take us somewhere neither of us could have imagined. He stood in the doorway, the morning light catching the edges of his hair, and for a moment I could only stare, unable to speak, because seeing him here in my kitchen after all these years made every memory and every lost moment rush back like a flood. The smell of coffee, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the floorboards, all of it grounded me in reality, yet at the same time it felt like a dream, impossible and vivid. And he shifted his weight, eyes flicking around the room as if taking it all in, and then he looked at me, really looked, and I saw the same boy I had fallen for in the man he had become. And it was disarming, because I had imagined this moment countless times, rehearsed it in my mind, and yet nothing could have prepared me for the way it actually felt, the tension between us thick and electric. And finally he spoke, his voice low and steady. I never thought I would see you again. And it hit me that we had both carried this weight silently, both replaying our last moments together over and over, both wondering if the other still thought about the same things, the same what-ifs. And I felt my throat tighten as I tried to respond, words tangling in my mouth. I didn't expect to either, I admitted, and he smiled a little sadly, but there was a flicker of relief there too, like a crack in the wall we had built around ourselves. And I noticed the way he ran his hand over the back of his neck, a nervous gesture I remembered from our first days together. And I realized just how much I had missed these little details, the things that made him him. And for a moment we just stood there, breathing the same air, letting the years fall away. And then he stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. And I remembered the countless times I had imagined this, imagined telling him things I had kept locked away, imagined hearing his voice again, imagined the way his presence could calm the chaos inside me. And it was overwhelming, this mix of fear, longing, and hope. And he finally said, I have so much to tell you, things I never said, things I wish I had. And I could feel my pulse quicken, because I had always wanted to hear those words, to understand, to know. But I was also afraid that the truths would change what little peace I had found over the years, afraid that they might undo everything. And I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. You can tell me anything, I whispered, and he nodded, taking a deep breath, the weight of hesitation hanging between us. And as he spoke, memories I had buried started surfacing, the laughter we shared, the arguments that seemed so serious at the time, the silent nights filled with longing and unsaid words, the little moments that had connected us, all of it rushing back as if the years apart had been erased in an instant. And I realized how fragile yet resilient our bond had been, stretched thin by distance but never broken. And he reached for the letter I had found earlier, the one tucked away for years, and said, I never wanted it to be lost. I wanted you to know. And as I unfolded it again, his words came alive, a bridge across the years, apologies and confessions laid bare, explanations for the silence that had kept us apart. And I felt tears sting my eyes, because I understood finally that he had never stopped caring, had never stopped hoping, had just been caught in circumstances neither of us could control. And the room seemed to shrink around us, our shared past pressing into the present, the air thick with unsaid emotions and tentative hope. And then he stepped back, his hand hovering for a moment as if unsure whether to touch or retreat, and he said quietly, "I don't know if this changes anything, but I had to tell you." And my heart ached because I knew he was as vulnerable as I felt, and I reached out, taking his hand gently, squeezing it just slightly, letting him know without words that I understood, that the past didn't define us, that we could start again if we wanted, and he smiled, that small tentative smile that had once made me melt, and the tension between us shifted, a fragile hope threading through it, and then he laughed softly, almost nervously, remembering something, and I realized it was like old times, the comfort and ease of our connection returning in small waves. And yet there was still a weight in the air, the unspoken truth that life had moved on in some ways, that neither of us was the same person we had been, that the road ahead would not be without its challenges, and I felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with fear, because finally seeing him, finally hearing him, made it clear that our story was far from over, and just as I opened my mouth to speak, he hesitated, eyes glancing down, then back to me, and said in a low voice, "There's something else, something I never told you," and I felt my stomach tighten because his tone carried the same gravity I remembered, the way he always knew how to make ordinary moments feel monumental, and I waited, barely breathing, because I had been waiting for this for years, and he continued, "I was supposed to go back that day, before everything fell apart, but I didn't," and the words hung between us like a question mark, incomplete, leaving me desperate to understand, and my mind raced through possibilities, everything from fear to relief to curiosity. I leaned closer, needing to hear the rest, needing him to fill the silence, and he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, like he was bracing himself for the confession, and my heart pounded with anticipation, knowing that whatever came next would change the way I saw him, change the way I saw us, and the room seemed to hold its breath, the sunlight streaming through the windows catching the edges of our past and present, the air thick with longing and unspoken love, and as he paused, I could feel the truth pressing on both of us, the vulnerability and honesty creating a space where nothing else existed but the two of us, and I realized that we were at a turning point, that our reunion was no longer just about nostalgia or memory, it was about choices, about whether we could bridge the years, forgive the misunderstandings, and embrace the love that had never really faded. And just as I opened my mouth to ask the question, to prompt the half-confession, he stopped me with a soft shake of his head and said quietly, "Not yet, you need to see this first," and he held out a small envelope, unfamiliar and yet familiar, a link to the past that would reveal everything, and as I took it, the weight of the envelope heavy in my hand, my pulse racing, I knew that the next moment would redefine everything I thought I knew about us, about love, about timing, leaving me suspended between fear and hope, unable to look away from him, unable to ignore the pull of what had always been between us. And that was the moment I understood that our reunion was just the beginning, that the years apart had only prepared us for this confrontation with our hearts. And as he stepped back slightly, giving me room but keeping his gaze locked on mine, I realized that the next step, the next revelation, would either bring us together in a way we had dreamed of for years or make us face the consequences of everything we had left unsaid. And I held the envelope tightly, taking a breath, because whatever was inside, whatever truths it contained, I was ready to see it, ready to confront the past and the future at once, and for the first time in years, I felt a rush of something I had almost forgotten, hope, pure and simple, shimmering between us, leaving me on the edge of discovery, of confession, and of a choice that could finally change everything. That I unfolded the envelope carefully, my hands shaking slightly, the paper thin but heavy with meaning, and as I read the words, the past seemed to settle over me like a soft but insistent weight, the truth I had longed for and feared all at once spilling into my hands. He had written it years ago but never sent it, explaining everything, and I realized that all the misunderstandings, the silence, the years apart, had not been because of lack of love, not because either of us had stopped caring, but because of circumstances beyond our control, a small but crucial misunderstanding that neither of us had known how to fix. And the memory of that day hit me sharply. The day he had left, the arguments that had felt so monumental, the words exchanged in anger and frustration, and suddenly they made sense, each one a piece of a puzzle I had been trying to complete for years. I looked up at him, and his expression mirrored mine, soft, open, vulnerable, and I could see the weight he had carried, the regret he had tucked into every unread letter, every unanswered call, and my chest ached at the thought of the years we had lost. Yet there was relief too. A quiet, trembling relief that the truth was finally here. between us undeniable, and I spoke first, my voice barely above a whisper. I had no idea, I thought it was my fault, and he shook his head gently, his eyes glistening. No, it was never your fault. I wanted to reach you. I tried so many times, but it never worked. And the pause hung between us, heavy and full of emotion. His words simple but enough to crack open all the walls I had built around my heart. I swallowed hard and said, I carried the blame for years. I carried the silence. And he reached across the small distance between us, his hand brushing mine. A touch that spoke of forgiveness and understanding, of longing and unspoken love, and he said quietly, I never stopped thinking about you, not for one day, not for a moment, and that admission made my eyes water because it confirmed what I had always hoped, what I had always felt, that despite the distance, the silence, the miscommunication, we had both held on to the same thing, we had both hoped, and suddenly the room felt small, intimate, as if it had always existed just for us, and I realized that confronting this truth, finally speaking it aloud, was both terrifying and freeing. I wanted to collapse into his arms, to tell him everything I had kept buried, to erase the years of regret with laughter and tears, but I held back, needing to hear more, to understand everything, and he leaned back slightly, taking a deep breath, and said, there's more, something I never told anyone, not even you. And I felt my heart skip because I sensed the gravity in his voice, the care with which he chose his words, and I urged him softly, tell me, I need to know, and he nodded, a faint tremor in his hand as he held my gaze. And he said that the misunderstanding that had driven us apart had involved someone else, a family member who had intercepted his messages, who had convinced him that I didn't want to hear from him, and my eyes widened, disbelief mingling with shock, because it explained everything, all the unanswered calls, the letters never sent, the silences that had felt so deliberate when they had been completely accidental. And I whispered, I can't believe it, I can't believe this was the reason. And he nodded, shame and relief mingling in his expression. Yes, and I tried to reach you, I kept trying, but I didn't know how to get past it. And I felt tears burn in my eyes, a mixture of sorrow and the joy of finally knowing, of finally understanding. And he continued, I wanted to come back sooner, I wanted to explain, but I didn't know if you would listen. And my chest tightened at the thought of how close we had been to losing everything. And I said softly, I would have listened, I would have always listened. And he gave a small, almost hopeful smile, that familiar warmth returning to his eyes, and the tension in the room shifted, the weight of years and misunderstandings lifting slightly, replaced with cautious hope, and I reached for his hand, squeezing it, letting him know that forgiveness was already beginning, that love could survive even this. And he held my hand in return, fingers curling around mine, and I felt the warmth of connection I had missed for so long, the reminder that some bonds cannot be broken, no matter the distance or silence. And then he leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice, and said, there's one more thing, something I only realized recently, something that changes everything about how I felt. And I froze, the words hanging in the air like a challenge, like a secret waiting to be revealed, my pulse racing as I searched his face, looking for a clue, anything. And he hesitated, just for a second, then looked directly into my eyes and said, I never stopped hoping that one day we would meet again like this. And I felt my chest tighten with emotion, because it was everything I had wanted to hear and feared to hear at the same time. The admission of enduring love, of longing, of faith in something that neither of us could control. And I whispered, I never stopped hoping either, my voice trembling. And he nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement, and then he said, but there's a choice we have to make, one that could change everything again. And I felt a lump in my throat because the tension returned, not with fear but with the gravity of decision, the weight of possibility, because knowing the truth was one thing, acting on it was another. And he looked at me, eyes searching, and said quietly, we can stay here in this moment, we can pretend the years didn't matter, or we can step forward together, risking everything for what we both feel. And my mind spun with all the emotions I had felt over the years, the longing, the regret, the hope, the joy, the fear, all colliding in a single heartbeat. And I realized that everything had led to this exact instant, the moment where truth, forgiveness, and love intersected. And I swallowed hard, feeling the air catch in my chest, knowing that whatever decision we made next would define the rest of our story. And just as I opened my mouth to respond, he added, softly, I won't pressure you, I'll wait for you to decide. And that left me suspended between heart and mind, between what I had always wanted and what I was afraid to risk. And as the sunlight spilled across the table, illuminating our hands entwined, the letter still between us, I realized that the next moment would be the defining one. The moment where we either let the past guide us or step bravely into a future we had been dreaming of separately for so long. And I felt my heartbeat echo in the quiet room, the world narrowing down to just the two of us, standing on the edge of something unknown and beautiful, and the cliffhanger of choice hung there, powerful, emotional, impossible to ignore, leaving me breathless, waiting for the next move, and knowing that whatever happened next would change everything about our lives forever. I stared at him across the kitchen table, the sunlight streaming in and catching the edges of the letter we had both held onto, and for the first time in years I felt a sense of calm wash over me, the weight of misunderstanding, of silence, of distance finally lifting. I reached across the table and took his hand gently, feeling the warmth and familiarity I had missed for so long, and he held it without hesitation, a small smile tugging at his lips, one that was soft and real and full of everything we had never said. And in that moment the years apart seemed to shrink, reduced to nothing by the honesty and presence before me. He leaned slightly closer, and his voice was low but steady as he said, "I never wanted to let go," and I saw the truth in his eyes, the truth that mirrored everything I had felt, the longing, the hope, the love that had never really faded, and I whispered back, "Neither did I," my chest tight with relief and emotion, and we laughed softly together, a light, almost breathless sound that carried away the tension of the past and left only the connection that had always existed between us. We spent the rest of the morning talking, not the cautious, careful talking of strangers, but the open, heartfelt conversation of people who knew each other completely, sharing memories both small and profound, laughing over old mistakes, recounting moments that had seemed insignificant at the time but had shaped who we were. And every word, every glance, every brush of our hands against each other reinforced the bond that had never been broken. I realized that forgiveness was not a single act but a process, and that holding space for each other, understanding, accepting, and choosing to move forward together was what truly healed us. And when he reached over and touched my cheek lightly, it was not just a gesture of intimacy but of reassurance, of a promise, and I felt my heart swell with a quiet, steady joy that I hadn't known for years. And then he smiled, that full, genuine smile, the one that reached his eyes and made me remember exactly why I had fallen in love with him in the first place. And I realized in that instant that love is not about the perfect timing. It is about patience, understanding, and the courage to continue even when the path is uncertain. And as the afternoon light softened across the room, I noticed a small envelope tucked under the stack of letters we had been holding, one I hadn't seen before, and I picked it up carefully, curiosity mixing with a soft nervousness, and inside was a note in his familiar handwriting, a short message that read, "No matter what, I will always carry this with me." A simple phrase that carried a world of meaning, and I understood immediately that this was the symbolic gesture, the final proof that love endures, that despite time, distance, misunderstandings, and life's twists, what we had shared had never been lost. And I reached for him again, squeezing his hand, feeling the comfort and certainty of the present, and he squeezed back, the connection unbroken, the promise of tomorrow tangible and alive, and we decided together to take the first small steps forward, not rushing, not trying to erase the past, but embracing the future with a shared understanding and tenderness. We walked to the park where we had first met all those years ago, and the familiar paths, the gentle rustle of leaves, and the sunlight through the trees reminded us of the continuity of life, the way memories linger and shape us, but do not confine us. And we sat on the bench where we had first laughed together, sharing small smiles and gentle words, the awkwardness and tension replaced by a quiet ease, the kind that comes from knowing someone deeply and choosing to stay connected. And I felt the weight of old regrets dissolve, replaced with gratitude for this second chance, for the clarity of truth and for the courage to forgive and embrace. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph, a picture of the two of us from long ago, our smiles wide, innocence and joy captured perfectly, and he handed it to me as a symbol, saying softly, "No matter the years, no matter the distance, this is who we are." And I held it carefully, tracing the edges with my fingers, and I knew he was right, that the essence of us had survived, quietly but resiliently. And as the sun began to lower, casting a golden glow over the park, we stood together, looking at the horizon, knowing that while the past had shaped us, it would not define the rest of our lives, that together we could create new memories, laugh again in the rain, share quiet mornings, and support each other in ways that mattered most. And he whispered with a soft certainty, "Let's promise to always be honest, to always come back." And I nodded, my heart full, because honesty, presence, and shared courage were the foundations that had brought us here, that had turned uncertainty into trust, and I replied, always, because it was true, and I felt a warmth spread through me, a feeling of home that only he could bring, and we sat together for a while longer, our shoulders touching, our hands intertwined, the world around us fading to a quiet hum, a backdrop to our reunion, and as we rose to leave, I slipped the small photograph back into my bag, knowing it was more than a memory, it was a promise, a reminder of love's endurance, and as we walked away from the bench side by side, laughing softly at something only we understood, I glanced at him and saw in his eyes the same mix of hope and wonder I felt in my own, and I realized that this was not just a reunion, not just a resolution, it was a beginning, a fresh chapter where the past was acknowledged, the truth embraced, and love allowed to grow unafraid. And as the golden light faded into the soft glow of evening, I felt a sense of completeness, of peace, of joy that was quiet but profound, and I knew that whatever challenges might come, whatever twists life had in store, we had found each other again, we had chosen to trust and to forgive, and as he squeezed my hand gently one last time before we stepped into the rest of our lives together, I whispered under my breath, "This is forever," and the words felt right, solid and cinematic, a perfect ending and a perfect beginning because love, real and enduring, had brought us full circle, and nothing could ever take it away.